Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Enthralling Conversations. This week, I'm very excited to interview Ilene Miller. She's the principal and founder of IPM Consulting. So hi, Ilene, great to have you to join us with us today. So first, I'm going to start the way I always do, which is who are you, where are you, and what is your professional role in the epilepsy space?
Thank you so much for having me, Laura. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I am foremost a parent and an advocate. I have a son who turns 20 in the new year, and he was diagnosed with epilepsy, a rare epilepsy called a hypothalamic hamartoma, or HH for short, at the age of 4. And it was quite the journey of getting him diagnosed, finding treatment, and really sort of seeing him through. I'm delighted to share that he has gone to college this fall.
Oh, that's great.
So we're thrilled for him. I'm an attorney and a nonprofit executive by training. I worked for many years as an executive director in the cancer community. And when my son was diagnosed, I transitioned to epilepsy. I helped to found Hope for Hypothalamic Hamartomas. And I've been very actively engaged in the epilepsy community ever since. And I'm physically located in Bethesda, Maryland.
Got it. And we've had the pleasure of working with you as a consultant to the Epilepsy Foundation, especially around the rares, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So tell me, do you have any hidden talents that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have any hidden talents, although I'm incredibly organized. So I suspect that is somewhat of a talent. And I love photographs and making photo books and travel. So having opportunities to travel and take those pictures and then put them into books. So
yeah, and if we ever get to travel again, that would be a wonderful thing, right?
That is true. Looking forward to those days returning.
Right. Now, you mentioned that your son, who has HH, is 20 and going to college, which is fabulous. Do you have other children?
I do have a younger son who is a rising junior in high school, and of his special talents, he's both on the football team and auditioning for the lead in a musical. So he's
wow, those are pretty opposite ends of the spectrum.
true.
There's a jock and a drama guy, right, at the same time. Interesting. All right. Well, I'd love to learn more about your work, especially in the rares. Obviously, your son has a rare condition. You've done some consulting for the Epilepsy Foundation. So tell us about the project that you did for epilepsy. And first, let's preface this by saying, epilepsy is not one disease. And that's why we've even started to say the epilepsies, because, when I was in the cancer field and childhood cancer, people would always say to me, when are you going to cure childhood cancer? Well, it wasn't one disease. There was dozens with hundreds of mutations, right? So talk a little bit about that and then the work that you've done for us regarding those rare epilepsies.
Yeah, I'm so glad you raised that point. And I think cancer is the perfect analogy. I think in the epilepsy community, we are conditioned to think about it as a single diagnosis and a single condition. And I think that we've got our work to do as a community to really get the word out there that this is a multiplicity of diseases and causes, and also a multiplicity of experiences. And my son's experience, our family experience, is the perfect example. He was diagnosed with what is a rare cause of epilepsy, meaning that there are less than 200,000 people living with that diagnosis. And typically those diagnoses tend to be rare, severe, and complex. And for many families, they are. In our instance, he has been at the kind of the typical end of the spectrum within his diagnosis. So I think anything that we can do to raise awareness, to help people understand that there are many causes of epilepsy, there are many different experiences within epilepsy, and even within the same diagnosis, there can be a spectrum of experiences within that diagnosis.
That's a great tipping point. The work that you did for us was very specific to having us understand what we could do in the rare epilepsy space, which I believe there's 60 different diseases represented. And like your son's disease, you mentioned that because it's a rare, it's less than 200,000. But we found in the pediatric cancer space, 200,000 for some diseases was a lot of patients, right? A lot of ours could have been a few hundred patients, right? So tell me about the work that you did for the rare epilepsies, which really ended up in this great piece. It was the Rare Epilepsy Landscape Analysis.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So it really came that my personal experience after my son was diagnosed was that I would show up to the epilepsy annual Epilepsy Society meeting, and I would see several different organizations that represented rare epilepsy sitting around the table. And over the course of a decade, really, the number of rare epilepsy specific organizations increased significantly, like doubling every year. So for me, I took a step back being an attorney and a nonprofit executive by trade. And I thought there are so many things where we are aligned that although each of these individual organizations are pursuing their own cures, their own information, their own support, their own community, I bet if we look across these different conditions and these different organizations, we would find that there are more that we have in common than that is different among us. And so that's exactly what I proposed to the Epilepsy Foundation. And I was very grateful to get a grant to do the work. And I was able to invite 40 organizations, and we collaboratively created a survey. And we covered everything from the founding of the organizations, their mission, their work in research, in support, in education, across information, their collaborations externally. And after we collaboratively developed that survey, 40 organizations participated in it. And then I ran the analysis and was able to report back to the Epilepsy Foundation, but also to the much broader community about those learnings. And those learnings still to this day have relevance. Where we were even 3 years ago when I undertook that project, where I interviewed 40 organizations, there are, hundreds of conditions of causes of epilepsy and hundreds of associated organizations. So even in the past 3 years, we've seen probably more than a doubling of organizations and causes in this space.
It was interesting, Ilene, when I came to the Epilepsy Foundation about 1.5 years ago, you were just starting to present that analysis. And that was one of the first documents that I went through. And it was a great education for me coming into the epilepsy space to realize, like the pediatric cancer world that I had just left, there was a plethora of underlying diseases for epilepsy. So it was great for me to see that. It was even at that time when I came in, we had the foundation was using the branding End Epilepsy. And, in knowing it's just like cure cancer, knowing that that's not really going to happen, we're using that in a different way now. But your work was really informative there. So tell me, when it comes to the Epilepsy Foundation, and you mentioned we have more in common than we do not, right? What do you think the role of the Epilepsy Foundation can be in the rare space?
Yeah, I think the Epilepsy Foundation is an incredibly valued partner to many of these rare epilepsy organizations. The organizations like the one that I helped to found over a decade ago are founded primarily by parents, most who don't have any epilepsy or nonprofit experience.
Right.
Suddenly, if you can imagine, you're a parent, you're likely caring for a patient who may have a severe complex case of epilepsy. So that in of itself can throw off, any individual. You add on top of that, now you're trying to found an organization, create a community, build a scientific advisory board, build a board of directors, learn perhaps for the first time how to fundraise, how to manage, how to budget. And so I have to really commend, I think, the Epilepsy Foundation, as well as other members of the Rare Epilepsy Network, which is now 70 members plus, hard to believe. And it did, just as an aside, it started as an initiative of the Epilepsy Foundation. And a few years ago, it seeded in the most positive way. I need a better word than seed. But the Rare Epilepsy Network continues to operate, and Epilepsy Foundation is one of its most strident, active supporters and members, really bringing its resources, its experience across all those different areas to the rare members, and helping to lead initiatives like advocacy, like policy, where many of these organizations in of themselves don't have that internal capacity. So we rely on the Epilepsy Foundation and its leadership to really help us make sure that we have a voice, in the broader communities.
It's interesting you mentioned a lot of these organizations are run by parents with no, nonprofit experience. And I've certainly noticed that across the board. So any place that we can help with infrastructure or the operational piece, that's a role that we can play. We're really trying to scale our assets so they can be utilized by the broader field, like our digital assets that we're building out all the time, or our learning management system. So anything we can do to take that off of these small organizations so they can really focus on, is it precision medicine for their specific genetic mutation, or et cetera. So we want them to focus where they can and not worry about the operational pieces, which are challenging. So tell me, and actually I was surprised you just said there's 70 organizations. So it's grown even since Last I heard, first, we had 40 in the survey, then it was 60, and now it's 70. So that's good to know. Tell me, and I just mentioned the genetic piece and the precision medicine. And before we go, I want to make sure you touch on that. What do you think the biggest, most exciting potential, new thing is in the rare space?
Yeah, I think, if I can stand on a hill with a microphone and a loudspeaker, I think really encouraging anybody diagnosed with epilepsy, and Epilepsy Foundation is, the biggest asset out there, where the majority of people are going to come to Epilepsy Foundation first. And so
Right.
I think the message that we need to scream from the mountaintops is, take the time, get yourself to a center of excellence, get as precise a diagnosis as you can. And if the team that you're working with, isn't offering you tools like genetic testing or advanced, digital imaging, you need to go somewhere else, because once you get that very precise diagnosis, all these information communities and hopefully ultimately precision medicine will open up for you.
If the takeaway from this interview is what is most important, the right diagnosis. I think we tell that to people all the time. It's not just your general practitioner, it's not just a neurologist, it's an epileptologist, right? So get that right diagnosis. Well, Ilene, it's been so delightful to talk to you today. I really appreciate your time. For viewers today, if you want more information, there is a link embedded in this screen, so please take a look. Ilene, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I know.